The first time with Jamal was nothing short of enchanting. I experienced the most intense pleasure of my life. He may have been young, but he carried the skill of a seasoned lover. His touch, his movements, and the way he built anticipation were unlike anything I had ever known. The foreplay alone left me breathless, awakening sensations I had long forgotten. This boy was not just pleasure. He was passion itself, a force that consumed me entirely. I let him release himself inside me, but it wasn't enough. I craved more. It was as if a part of me had been dormant for years, and now that it had stirred, there was no suppressing it. I had spent so long deprived of touch, of passion, of desire, that now, after just one taste, I was insatiable. I needed more. Let's pause for a moment. If you've made it this far, you're clearly intrigued. And trust me, this is only the beginning of an electrifying journey. Make sure to follow along for more, because the story only grows more intense from here. Now, let's go back to where it all began. I never imagined I would become the kind of woman who strays from her marriage, who breaks the vows meant to last a lifetime. But I also never imagined feeling so invisible, so untouched, so unwanted. For over 40 years, I have been a wife, and for nearly as long, a mother. Somewhere along the way, the part of me that was simply a woman faded into the background. My husband, Fareed, is a good man, a loyal man, but with time, he stopped seeing me. His touch became infrequent, his words shorter, his desire for me all but vanished. I told myself to be patient, to accept that love evolves, that marriage isn't only about passion. But deep inside, I was starving, and I had ignored my hunger for far too long. Then came Jamal. He moved in next door with his mother, a 21-year-old college student with a presence that was impossible to ignore. Tall, strong, his dark skin shimmered under the sunlight, his smile effortless, his body exuding the confidence of youth. There was an energy about him, a vibrancy that awakened something inside me, something I thought had died long ago. At first, I brushed it off as a fleeting attraction, something foolish and absurd. What could a young man like him possibly see in an older woman like me? But the way he looked at me, the way he spoke, the way he made me feel, it was dangerous. He didn't see me as just a mother, just a wife. He saw me as a woman. It began with subtle moments, the lingering glances when we talked, the innocent touches that sent shivers through my skin, the way he made me laugh in a way that felt new and intoxicating. I convinced myself it was harmless, that I was simply enjoying the attention. But deep down, I knew I was playing with fire. The first time it happened, I was alone in my backyard. It was one of those warm evenings where the air felt thick with unspoken possibilities. Jamal was outside too, stretching after his evening jog. He walked over, sweat glistening on his skin, his breath still heavy from the run. His shirt clung to his chest, outlining the strength beneath it. We talked about nothing and everything, and before I knew it, he had moved closer. His eyes held mine in a way that made my stomach tighten with anticipation. "I see you watching me," he murmured, his voice smooth, teasing. I should have laughed it off. I should have turned away. But instead, I met his gaze and whispered, "And what if I am?" He stepped in, close enough for me to feel the warmth radiating from his body. His scent, masculine, laced with sweat, clouded my senses. My breath hitched. My pulse thundered in my ears. "You're beautiful," he said softly. Those words shattered the last of my restraint. Years of loyalty, of suppressing my own needs, of pretending I didn't long for more, it all crumbled in an instant. My fingers traced the edge of his jaw, my lips quivering with anticipation. And then, as if the universe itself had been waiting for this moment, his mouth met mine, hot, insistent, consuming. And I didn't pull away. That night, I made a choice to give in to the hunger I had silenced for years, a choice to be selfish, a choice to reclaim the pleasure that had been denied to me for so long, a choice that would change everything. I knew it was wrong. I knew the consequences of being discovered would be devastating. My family, my reputation, My very sense of self would be shattered. Yet, with Jamal's hands exploring my body, his lips igniting flames across my skin, none of that mattered. I had been deprived for too long, and now I was finally indulging. One encounter with Jamal wasn't enough. It felt as if a locked door inside me had been flung open, and now that it was ajar, I had no desire to shut it again. Years of neglect, of yearning for passion, for intimacy, had left me starved. One taste wasn't enough. I craved more. I needed more. Our affair unfolded effortlessly, as if it had always been destined. Every secret encounter became an addiction, a rush I couldn't resist. Mornings were spent playing the role of the devoted wife, preparing breakfast for Fareed, feigning normalcy. But the moment he left for work, I found myself running into Jamal's arms, my body aching for his touch. He was relentless, his youthful vigor a stark contrast to my husband's indifferent detachment. Jamal made me feel alive again, not just as a wife, not merely as a mother, but as a woman with desires, with needs. He worshipped my body, tracing every curve with reverence, making me forget the years that separated us. In his embrace, I wasn't a woman nearing 60. I was vibrant, desired, utterly consumed by passion. We sought solace in the shadows, meeting wherever we could, his room, my backyard, even within the walls of my own home when my husband was away. The danger of discovery only heightened the excitement. My pulse would race at the thought of getting caught, yet that very fear only deepened my hunger for him. One afternoon, as I lay entwined in Jamal's arms, still trembling from the pleasure he had given me, he traced his fingers over my lips and murmured, "You should tell your story." I frowned, confused. "Tell my story?" "Yes," he said, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "People should know that pleasure isn't reserved for the young." I laughed, shaking my head. No one would listen. He propped himself up, his expression serious. They would. Trust me. And maybe he was right. Perhaps there were others like me. Others who hungered for something they were too afraid to admit. If you're listening to this, maybe you understand. Maybe you, too, are suppressing a desire, waiting for the moment to let it consume you. If you want to hear more, if you want to know just how deep I fell into this abyss of pleasure, stay with me, because the most intoxicating parts of my story are yet to be told. Balancing my affair with Jamal and my marriage to Fareed became a game I was too entangled in to abandon. Every day, I slipped between two lives, the dutiful wife and the insatiable lover. The deception was exhilarating, and the longer I got away with it, the bolder I became. At first, I was cautious, ensuring our meetings remained hidden. But soon, passion overruled prudence. We took reckless risks. Midnight rendezvous in his car, hushed exchanges in my own home, stolen caresses when no one was watching. It was intoxicating. It was dangerous. And I savored every moment. The more time I spent with Jamal, the less patience I had for Fareed. His presence irritated me. His touch felt foreign, unwelcome. I found excuses to avoid him, claimed headaches, stayed out longer than necessary, anything to steal more time with Jamal. There were close calls, moments when I feared Fareed suspected something, a misplaced earring in Jamal's room, a scarf forgotten in haste, the scent of a cologne that wasn't his. But rather than scare me into stopping, the risk only made me crave more. I was no longer a wife performing a role. I was a woman finally living for herself, and I wasn't ready to give it up. The day Fareed discovered the truth was inevitable. Secrets, no matter how carefully guarded, have a way of unraveling. I had been careless for too long. I will never forget the look on his face when he walked into our bedroom and found me in Jamal's embrace. His eyes widened in disbelief, his body frozen, as if his mind refused to accept what it was witnessing. "Zara," he whispered, his voice breaking. Jamal sprang away from me. But it was too late. The guilt and fear on Jamal's face were unmistakable. The energy in the room shifted in an instant. Pleasure dissolving into sheer panic, desire crumbling into catastrophe. The weight of my actions, The undeniable truth of my betrayal was laid bare before my husband. But I didn't plead. I didn't weep. I didn't even offer an apology, because, despite everything, I had no regrets. Ferd staggered backward, his fingers gripping the doorframe as though it were the only thing keeping him from collapsing. His expression was a mix of anguish and fury, his forehead creased with pulsing veins that betrayed his barely contained rage. His voice, strained and laced with disbelief, cut through the thick silence. How long? My throat tightened as shame heated my skin, but no words could lessen his pain. What could I possibly say? That I had been starved for affection? That I had spent years feeling invisible, only to finally be seen again by a man young enough to be my son? That I had chosen fleeting passion over the life we had built together? Jamal, still shirtless beside the bed, took a tentative step forward. Sir, I... Shut up. Ferd's voice was like steel, slicing through the air with an edge that left no room for argument. His burning gaze turned back to me. Get dressed. Now. The authority in his tone sent a shiver through me, but not in the way it once had. I reached for my robe, the intensity of his stare searing into me like fire. Jamal, hands unsteady, hurriedly pulled on his clothes. Before he left, he glanced at me one last time, searching my face for something, an explanation, a shred of regret, perhaps even an excuse. But I had nothing left to give him. Ferd stormed out of the room, his heavy footsteps echoing through the house. I knew this wasn't over. This was only the beginning of the storm. The silence that followed was deafening. Jamal slipped out the back door, leaving me alone to face the consequences of my choices. I found Ferd in the living room, pacing, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles had gone white. When he finally looked at me, his eyes weren't just filled with rage. They were shattered, holding a pain I knew I could never mend. Was I such a terrible husband? His voice was softer now, but it carried the weight of a man who had just lost everything. I hesitated before responding. You stopped seeing me, Ferd, his face twisted in anguish. So you let a child do what I should have been doing? You let him touch you? In our home? In our bed? My fists clenched at his words. He didn't defile me. He made me feel alive. The silence that followed was suffocating. I watched something inside him break completely. Whatever love had remained between us shattered at that moment. His bitter laughter was void of humor. You disgust me. I braced myself for the inevitable explosion, for his fury, his insults, perhaps even for him to throw me out. But what I hadn't expected was the sorrow that settled over him, a heavy fog of grief that seemed to steal the very breath from his lungs. He sank into a chair, rubbing his temples as though trying to comprehend the wreckage of our life. How could you do this to our family? And that was when reality truly hit me. It wasn't just whom I had betrayed. It was my children, my grandchildren. I had done something that would stain their perception of me forever. The news spread fast. Ferd didn't keep my infidelity a secret, nor did he shield me from the judgment that followed. He told our children, and they, in turn, abandoned me. My eldest son, Ahmed, refused to even hear my side of the story. I can't believe you, he spat when I called him. You're our mother. And you threw everything away for some boy. He wasn't just some boy, I whispered, but even to me, the words felt empty. Do you even hear yourself? His voice was thick with revulsion. He's younger than me. Do you have any idea what you've done? To us? To Baba? I know, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. No, you don't. Because if you did, you never would have done it. His voice broke. You never cared about anyone but yourself. And then he hung up. My daughters weren't any different. They ignored my calls. When I showed up at my youngest doorstep, she wouldn't even open the door. Go away, she said from the other side. You're dead to me, dead to my own children. The loneliness came swiftly, an avalanche of isolation that swallowed me whole. The life I had built, the family I had cherished, was gone in an instant. Faird filed for divorce without hesitation. He didn't fight me over the house or the finances. He simply wanted me out of his life. When the papers arrived, I signed them without hesitation. Did I regret my choices? No. Even in my solitude, even in the endless stretch of empty nights, I did not regret what I had done, because for those fleeting months I had truly lived. I had felt passion, desire, hunger, things I had denied myself for decades. And though I lost everything, I had found myself. People will judge me. They will call me names, brand me a disgrace. But they were not in my skin. They did not feel what I felt. They did not live my life. And if I were given the chance to go back and change things, I wouldn't. Not a single thing. To those who understand, to those who have ever felt trapped in their own skin, yearning for a taste of freedom, this story is for you. And if my truth speaks to you, don't forget to listen, because sometimes the greatest sin is not in the betrayal, but in denying yourself the chance to feel alive.